Evening, Clay County. It's a little bit late. I was doing some other things on the computer, so we're starting a little bit later than normal. I'm gonna try to get a couple of pages in tonight uh, because I think they flow together. We're in the biology textbook adopted by Clay County for 2018, and we're on pages 292 and 293 tonight. They're talking about natural selection. Um, Gonna give a minute or so for a couple people to get here. This is Science Freedom Florida. My name is Ernie Lawrence, and I have been a physics teacher for 11 years in the public school systems in both Texas and Florida. And I'm just going through right now and examining this biology textbook in light of science, in light of the laws of physics and chemistry, and even biology. So, what we're going to talk about tonight, this is introducing one of the key points of evolution, and that is the what they call the theory of natural selection. I think, honestly, the premise of natural selection is well founded in evidence. I think it's something that is observable, demonstrable. Is something that there's not really any question about. So I don't know why they still call that part theory. Um, I understand that as part of evolution, the evolutionary model, which they continue to call theory incorrectly, but um, I understand why, as part of that, it might be viewed as such. But natural selection is not in dispute with anybody. Um, what's in dispute, and what we're going to touch on tonight, is that they use it incorrectly or that they present it incorrectly. So we're going to read through some of the text here, and then we're going to examine that. So going to go ahead and get started here on page 292. Not going to really ever. I'm not going to read all of the pages here. I'm just going to read bits and pieces here. At the top, it says "connect to your world," and they're talking about how a worldview changed, and they talk about questioning your outlook or your opinion on an issue. And I guess it may be a little bit nitpicky here, but we're not really talking about opinions. This is this is not really about opinions here. This is about science. This is about facts and trying to discover the truth about the universe. Science comes from Latin. It means to know. And so if we're trying to know truth, then this opinion really doesn't have much to do with anything. Um, so they're couching in terms like that, and I don't know if that's a great idea when you're talking about science to talk about opinions. Um, but then again, these people believe in subjective truth anyway, so I guess that's par for the course for them. Um, So anyway, it talks about Darwin and his trip for 20 years doing the research, and he talks about one of the things that he noticed is he went to his home country of England, and he saw breeders breeding for specific traits, and this was called artificial selection. It was a selection method that was forced onto the organisms, forced onto the animals or whatever, or plants, looking for desirable traits. And so they would only allow the animals that had the desired traits to breed true. And so there was a selection that was taking place there, but it was caused by man. And so it was definitely artificial. There's nothing natural about this. And one of the things that it allowed him to explore was this idea of heritability. The thing about heritability in Darwin's day is they didn't know anything about genetics. There was no idea of DNA or chromosomes or anything like that. Biology hadn't dug down that far yet. They just knew that there were these traits, these visible characteristics about plants and animals and other living organisms that they could see. And the interesting thing about this, it's called phenotype. Phenotype is what an animal looks like. Does it have sharp teeth, or does it have flat teeth for eating grass? Does it have fur? Does it give birth to its young, or is it through an egg? Or these things are things that we can see, that you just look at it. A kid can see them and understand them. So Darwin, a lot of what he did was based on an understanding of phenotype, and it wasn't until around the 20th century that we started getting into what's called genotype and talking about genes and stuff. And the argument from there goes that the genotype proved to support Darwin's ideas of evolution. I disagree with that completely. Obviously, I think that the predictions that were made did not bear out, thanks to the stuff that we learned about genetics. In fact, I think it showed just the opposite. But we'll get into that when we get there. But today we're talking about this idea of natural selection. So it's really gets started on the next page here. Let me zoom in on the page. And it says at the top of page 293 that Darwin compared what he learned about breeding to his ideas on adaptation. In artificial selection, features such as reversed neck feathers, large crops, or extra tail feathers are favored over generations only if these traits are liked by the breeders, which is true. That's how artificial selection works. No problems here. However, breeders might also select against features that are not desirable or useful. During artificial selection, humans act as the selective agent. In nature, however, the environment creates the selective pressure that determines if a trait is passed on or not. And see, here's one of the major issues that I have in the way that they're using natural selection. Natural selection doesn't determine anything. It's not an active force. Natural selection is a passive force. It's something that plays into the ability of the animal to survive long enough to reproduce. And let's define natural selection, and then we'll come back to this idea. Darwin used this line of thinking for his theory of natural selection. Natural selection is a mechanism by which individuals that have inherited beneficial adaptations show differential reproductive success. In other words, they tend to produce more offspring on average than do other individuals. Nothing in this section is accurate. Natural selection does not mean that these animals produce more offspring. They may only produce one, but if they produce one that it has the gene expression, which is what adaptation is, they have the expression of genes that are able to better survive in the environment as it's found, then that one offspring will go on to produce more offspring. That's what survival of the fittest means, or what it entails. So natural selection, the environment does not provide a deterministic pressure, the way that the book says. What the environment does is it is as it's found. You might be in a rainforest, or you might be at the equator in a desert, or you might be in a deciduous forest, or an evergreen forest, or you might be in a swampland like we are here in Florida, like every day of our lives. And this is how the environment is. This is how the organisms are brought into it. And based on how they find it, there are certain traits that are that they inherit, that maybe an alligator in the Florida swamplands has a little bit stronger tail, and so maybe it's hatched with siblings, and in that clutch of alligators, that one alligator has the biggest tail, and so it's able to catch food better. It's able to find its prey better, and so it eats more, becomes bigger, and doesn't become prey itself because it's too big, and so it goes on to produce offspring where its siblings in the same clutch maybe didn't get as much. Their tails weren't as big, they didn't catch as much food, and Some of them got eaten when they were really young. Some of them maybe survived, and their tails were not as long, and over time, their descendants don't express a bigger tail like that one sibling did, and so that line kind of dies off. And it's not that natural selection, like the artificial selection, chose that creature. The environment just was, and then the creature had something that benefited or not. It's a very passive. Natural selection is kind of a misnomer because it's a very passive kind of system. It's a very passive set of events. And so I don't like the language here. Again, natural selection is demonstrable. I don't have a problem with the idea of it. I'm not in favor of the way the book presents it. And then they show, let's see here, this idea that they have inherited beneficial adaptations. This is an interesting thing here because, and this is a big point about natural selection. Natural selection doesn't actually determine evolution in any way. It has no function at all with bringing rocks to man. There is nothing about natural selection that allows for or explains or describes in any way how chemicals in a pool of slime became man over millions of years. Natural selection doesn't cover that. It's, like I said, it's passive. It's not deterministic. It doesn't have an active component to it. And so when we talk about natural selection, look at the way the book talks about it. These individuals have inherited beneficial adaptations, like the big tail. Well, if they inherited it, it already existed genetically in the parent. So there's nothing in the transition from parent to offspring that is any kind of genetic change that is explanatory to prop up or support evolution. Nothing about it. I've heard it put multiple times by different people. I'm not sure who originated the quote, but the idea is that natural selection can explain the survival of the fittest, but not the arrival of the fittest. And I like that quote. I think it's very succinct and very perfect in dealing with how natural selection doesn't really do anything in terms of evolution. And they tout it as part of the evolutionary process or the evolutionary model, and it doesn't. There's nothing about natural selection that gets us here. All it does is it weeds out the weaker ones, and it thins the gene pool. You can talk about it taking out different genetic strands, and that's fine, okay? But that's loss of information. What we need for evolution to be true is a gain in information, and natural selection cannot provide that. There is nothing in natural selection that adds information to a gene pool. It's already there by the time natural selection gets a hold of the organism. And so to talk about it as a selective agent, the way that humans select, oh, that's the cutest dog ever, and that's the cutest dog ever, let's breed them and have these puppies. And, no matter that the face is all squished in, or no matter that the legs are too short to catch prey or anything like that, they're just super cute, like a teacup poodle. Super cute, but there's no survivability in that. But humans actively selected what they desired. There's a mind involved in that. And the mind is limited and doesn't make great choices sometimes, but it's active. Natural selection, the environment doesn't choose anything. There's no choosing. All right, here we are. We're back. Sometimes I tell you what, I think my router's getting old. Who knows? But anyway, the book says that in nature the environment is the selective agent, and that's just wrong. That's not even. The agency is active, and the environment is not active. It's passive. So it says, therefore, in nature, characteristics are selected only if they give advantages to individuals and the environment as it is right now. Um, Again, I don't like the word selected. I don't like the active way of presenting it, but yes, the environment as it is right now. That's a good way to put it. Furthermore, Darwin reasoned desirable breeds are not produced immediately. He knew that it sometimes took many generations for breeders to produce the varieties he had observed. Now, that's an interesting point to mull over here. The trait that is important to survivability doesn't show up in one generation. Okay, we're talking about multiple generations here, and Darwin saw it. Darwin understood it, and yet, if it doesn't show up in a generation, then how in the world does natural selection leave the creature without the actual survivable trait? There's not enough into the, like if we talk about the alligator with a long tail, if it needs such a certain length to have any measurable survivability over others, if it took 5-6 generations to get to the tail length needed to have the advantage, well then who's to say between those, it's absolute pure luck that 5 to 6 generations survive long enough over others that were similar enough that it didn't matter for that one heritable trait to get to the one that actually was the survivable one. And so natural selection doesn't even become a part of it. So for there to be this survivability, you've got to have this trait expressed immediately. And we talk about a tail like that or some other silly things, but when you get into the transition from no eyes to having eyes, or you get into the transition from having no wings to wings, and even just ignoring for the moment the idea of the addition of genetic information, which we'll get to, but just allowing for that, allow that genetic mutations provide for new information, and somehow we can get these things. The generations required to go from no eye to eye are so many that the likelihood of survivability is zero. It's mathematically zero. And so the thing that developed what the evolutionist would allege is the first stage of no eye to eye, whether that's a light sensory thing or whatever, just to get that one first part of the eye would be so subtle that statistically there's no way that it's gonna survive long enough to pass that on to a point of, okay, this is now a survivable trait. It's something that's given an advantage. And then when you accumulate that to the full eye, by the time you get to the full eye, you've gone from impossible to just ludicrous. I mean, they've gone plaid, and I hope some of you get that reference. But there's nothing in the natural selection that is any kind of proof at all for evolution. It's not even a useful part of it. You could take the natural selection idea, completely take it out of the section on evolution in the textbook, plop it down in its own chapter, and talk about natural selection, and it would fit just fine. Nobody would have any problems with it. It would work perfectly, and you don't have to sit here and kind of try to prop up, oh look, natural selection works, therefore evolution has to work. See, we got a part of it that's yes Adam, it's Spaceballs reference. Thank you. I was hoping somebody's going to get it. But they throw the natural selection in because they try to allege that it has something to do with it, and it's just there to kind of prop up because they can point to something that actually works and then say, well, part of it works, and you just trust us, and the rest of it works too. So anyway, that's all I got for tonight. I know I might seem like I'm a little tired, a little worn out. I guess maybe I am. I'm about to head to bed, so maybe I'll maybe I'll perk up a little bit tomorrow. So anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. We'll continue on with natural selection in the next few pages. The book has a lot to say on it, and has a lot that isn't correct to say about it. So, but there was just enough in 2 pages here that I think that could get one video in. So, again, thank you all for watching Science Freedom Florida. Share it, please. And my wife's coming in. Oh no, here we go. Yeah. Oh, now everybody's doing the buttons and stuff, the emoticons. Thanks. But anyway, if you would please share this around, let people know, and get the word out. And above everything, guys, just keep learning. And thanks.